exact processes, auditing, game, and no game conditions. In Scientology, the most important single elements to the auditor are game conditions and no game conditions. Reason: all games are aberrative. All processing is directed toward establishing game conditions. Little or no processing is directed toward no game conditions. And therefore, it is of the utmost importance to know exactly what these are. For one could be superficial about it and lose. Rule: all games are repetitive, some are fun. The elements of games to the auditor are: a game consists of freedoms, barriers, and purposes. In a game, one's own team or self must receive no effect and must deliver an effect upon the other team or opponent. A game should have space and preferably a playing field. A game is played in the same time continuum for both sides, all players. A game must have something which one does not have in order for it to be won. Some parts of the dynamics must be included for a game condition to exist. The amount of dynamics included represents the tone of the game. Games occur only when there is intention opposing intention, purpose opposing purpose. A scarcity of games focuses the player to accept less desirable games. Participations in any game, whether it be the game of the sick man, jealous wife, or polio, is preferably being in a no game condition. The type of game considered by a person is determined by his conditions as to how much and what effect he may receive while trying to deliver an effect. Games are the basic mechanism for continuing attention. To play a game, one must be able to not know his past and future, and not know his opponent's capable intentions. Conditions are: attention, identity, effect on opponents, no effect on self, can't have on opponents and goals and the areas, have on self, tools of play, own goals and field, purpose, problems of play, self-determinism, opponents, the possible of loss, the possible of winning, communication, non-arrival. No game conditions are: knowing all, not knowing everything, serenity, namelessness, no effect on opponent, effect on self or team, others have everything self can't have, solutions, pan-determinism, friendship with all, understanding, total communication, no communication, win, lose, no universe, no playing field, arrival, death. Just sounds like things overlap one another for both things. Process only with these conditions listed as game conditions. Do not process directly toward these conditions listed as no game conditions. So doing, the auditor will run out, erase the aberrative effect of game, and restore the ability to play a game. Identities, valence. There are 4 identities or valences, where when one is in his own valence, he is said to be himself. As departs from his own identity, he comes into the following: exchange valence. One has directly superimposed the identity of another on his own. Example: daughter becomes own mother to some degree. Remedy: one directly runs out mother. Attention valence. One has become the valence B because one wants attention from C. Example: one becomes mother because mother received attention from father while self did not. Remedy: run out father even though preclear appears in violence of mother. Synthetic valence. One takes a valence about which he has been told. Example: Mother tells child false things about father, accuses child of being like father, with result that child is forced into father's balance. Remedy: run out mother, even though pre-clear does not seem to be near mother's balance. Auditing procedures. All requisites for auditing from here on are entirely concerned with procedures and processes. By auditing, a procedure is meant the general model of how one goes about adjusting a pre-clear. This includes an ability to place one question worded exactly the same over and over and again to the pre-clear, no matter how many times the pre-clear has answered the question. It should include the ability to acknowledge with a good and alright every time a pre-clear executes or completes the execution of a command. It should include the ability to accept a communication from the pre-clear. When the pre-clear has something to say, the auditor should acknowledge the fact that he has received the pre-clear's communication and should pay some attention to the communication. Procedure also includes the ability to sense when the pre-clear is being overstrained by processing or being unduly annoyed, and to handle such crisis in the session to prevent the pre-clear from leaving. An auditor should also have the ability of handling startling remarks or occurrences by the pre-clear. An auditor should also have the knack of preventing the pre-clear from preventing the pre-clear from talking obsessively, since prolonged conversation markedly reduces the haviness of the pre-clear, and the sooner long dissertations by the pre-clear are cut off the better of the session in general. Processes as distinct from procedures consist of utilizing the principle of the gradient scale to the end of placing the pre-clear in better control of himself, in his mind, the people, and universe around him. By gradient scale is meant a proceeding from simplicity toward greater difficulty, giving the pre-clear always no more than he can do, by giving him as much as he can do until he can handle a great deal. The idea here is to give the pre-clear nothing but wins, and to refrain from giving the pre-clear losses in the game of processing. Thus, it can be seen that processing is a term actively, and it is not itself a game whereby the auditor opposes the seeks to defeat the pre-clear, and the pre-clear seeks to defeat the auditor, for when this condition exists, little results in processing. The earliest stage of auditing consists in taking over control of the pre-clear, so as to restore to the pre-clear more control of himself than he has had. The most fundamental step is then location, whereby the pre-clear is made to be aware of the fact that he is that he is in an auditing room, that the auditor is present, and that the pre-clear is being a pre-clear. Those conditions will become quite apparent if one realizes that it would be very difficult for a son to process a father. A father is not likely to recognize anything else than a boy he raised as in his auditor. Therefore, the father would have to be made aware of the fact that the son was a competent practitioner before the father could be placed under control in processing. One of the most elementary commands in Scientology is, "Look at me, who am I?" After a pre-clear has been asked to do this many times until he can do so quickly and accurately without protest, it can be said that the pre-clear will have found the auditor. Okay, that definitely goes with the whole thing of hearing that from people saying they keep getting asked the same question, although they've already answered it at the same time more and more. Okay. The pre-clear is asked by the auditor to control, which is to say start, change, and stop the anatomy of control. Anything he is capable of controlling. In a very bad case, that this might be a very small object being pushed around on a table, being started and changed and stopped each time specifically and only at the auditor's command until the pre-clear himself realizes that he himself can start, change, and stop the object. Sometimes 4 or 5 hours spent in the exercise are very well spent on a very difficult pre-clear. The pre-clear is then asked to start, change, and stop his own body under the auditor's specific and precise direction. In all of his commands, the auditor must be careful never to give a second command before the first one has been fully obeyed. A pre-clear in the procedure is walked around the room and is made to start, change the direction of, and stop his body, one of these at a time, and emphasis until he realizes that he can do so with ease. Only now could it be said that the session is well in progress, or that a pre-clear is securely under the auditor's command. It should be noted especially that the goal of Scientology is better self-determinism for the pre-clear. The rules out at once hypnotism, drugs, alcohol, or other control mechanisms used by other and older therapists. It will be found that such things are not only necessary, but they are a direct opposition to the goals of greater ability for the pre-clear. The principal points of concentration for the auditor now becomes the ability of the pre-clear to have. The ability of the pre-clear is to not know, and the ability of the pre-clear to play a game. An additional factor is the ability of the pre-clear to be himself and not a member of other people, such as his father, his mother, his maternal partner, or his children. The ability of the pre-clear is increased by adjusting him to the process known as the trio. These are 3 questions, or rather commands. 1. Look around here and tell me what you could have. 2. Look around here and tell me what you would permit to remain in place. 3. Look around and tell me with what you could dispense. Number one above is used usually about 10 times. Then number 2 is used 5 times. And number 3 is used once. This ratio of 10, 5, and 1 would be an ordinary or routine approach to haviness. The end in view is to bring the pre-clear into a condition whereby he can possesses or own or have whatever he sees, without further conditions, ramifications, or restrictions. This is the most therapeutic of all processes, elementary as it might seem. It is done without too much two-way communication or discussion with the pre-clear, and it is done until the pre-clear can answer questions 1, 2, and 3 equally well. It should be noted at once that 25 hours of use of this process by an auditor upon a pre-clear brings about a very high rise in tone. By saying 25 hours, it is intended to give the idea of the length of time the process should be used, as it is a strain on the usual persons to repeat the same question over and over. It will be seen that the auditor should be well disciplined or very well trained before he audits. In the case of a pre-clear who is very unhappy, can't have is substituted for have, etc. In each of the above questions for a few hours until the pre-clear is ready for the trio in its have form. This can, can't is the plus and minus aspect of all thought, and in Scientology is called by a specialized word, dichotomy. The rehabilitation of the ability of the preclear to not know is also rehabilitation of the preclear in the same stream. Since the process of time consists of knowing the moment and not knowing the past and not knowing the future simultaneously, this process, like all other Scientology processes, is repetitive. The process is run ordinarily only after the preclear is in very good conditions and is generally run in an exterior, well-inhabited place. Here the auditor, without exciting public comment, indicates a person and asks the preclear, "Can you not know something about that person?" The auditor does not permit the preclear to not know things which the preclear already doesn't know. The preclear not knows only those things which are visible and apparent about the person. This is also run on other objects in the environment, such as walls, floors, chairs, and other things. The auditor should not be startled when, for the preclear, large chunks of the environment starts to disappear. This is ordinarily routine, and in effect, the preclear should make the entirety of the environment disappear at his own command. The environment does not disappear for the auditor. The end goal of this not know process is the disappearance of the entire universe under the preclear's control, but only for the preclear. It will be discovered while running that the preclear's heaviness may deteriorate. If this happens, he was not run enough on the trio before he was run on this process. It is only necessary in such a case to enter space. Look around here and tell me what you could have with the not know command to keep the preclear in good conditions. Drop of happiness is manufactured by nervous agitation, obsessive talk, or semi-unconsciousness or dopiness in the part of the preclear. These manifestations indicate only reduction of happiness. The reverse of the question here is, tell me something that you would be willing to have that person, indicated by the auditor, not know about you. Both sides of the question have to be audited. The process can be continued for 25 hours or even 50 or 75 hours of auditing with considerable benefits, so long as it does not react too violently upon the preclear in terms of loss of happiness. It should be noted that in running either happiness or not know on a preclear may exercise. In other words, it may be apparent either by his observation or because the preclear informs him that the auditor has exercised a preclear. Under the Parts of Man section, there is an explanation of this phenomenon. In modern auditing, the auditor does not do anything odd about this beyond receive and be interested in the preclear statement of the fact. The preclear should not be permitted to become alarmed, since it is usual manifestation. A preclear is in better condition and will audit better be exercised than in his head. Understanding that an actual ability to not know is an ability to exercise by self-command the past without suppressing it with energy or going into any other method is necessary to help the preclear. It is the primary rehabilitation in terms of knowingness. Forgetting is a lower manifestation than not knowingness. The third ability to be addressed by the auditor is the ability of the preclear to play a game. First and foremost, in the requisites to playing a game is the ability to control. One must be able to control something in order to participate in the game. Therefore, the general rehabilitation of control by starting, changing, and stopping things is a rehabilitation in the ability to play a game. When a preclear refuses to recover it is because the preclear is using his state as a game and does not believe that there is any better game for him to play than the state he is in. He may protest if this is called a game. Nevertheless, any condition will surrender if the auditor has the preclear invent similar conditions or even tell lies about the existing conditions. Inventing games or inventing conditions or inventing problems alike rehabilitate the ability to play a game. Chief among these various rehabilitation factors are control, start, change, and stop. Problems and the willingness to overcome or be overwhelmed. One ceases to be able to have games when one loses control over various things, when one becomes short of problems, and when one is unwilling to be overwhelmed, and the other words, to lose, or to overwhelm to win. It will be found while running happiness as in the trio above that one may run down the ability to play a game, since happiness is a reward of a game in part. In the matter of problems, it will be seen that these are completely necessary to the playing of a game. The autonomy of the problem is intention versus attention. This is, of course, in instance the purpose of all games, to have two sides, each one with an opposed intention. Technically, a problem is two or more purposes in conflict. It is simply to detect whether or not the preclear is suffering from a scarcity of games. The preclear who needs more games clutches to himself various present time problems. If an auditor is confronted with a preclear who is being obsessed by a problem in present time, he knows two things. One, that the preclear's ability to play games is low, and two, that he must run an exact process at once to rehabilitate the preclear in session. It often happens at the beginning of an auditing session that the preclear has encountered a heavy present time problem between sessions. The preclear must always be consulted before the session is actually in progress as to whether or not he has anything worrying him. To a preclear who is worried about some present time situation or problem, no other process has any greater effectiveness than the following one. The auditor, with a very brief discussion of the problem, asks the preclear to invent a problem of comparable magnitude. He may have to reword this request to make the preclear understand it completely, but the auditor wants, in essence, the preclear to invent or create a problem he considers similar to the problem he has. If the preclear is unable to do this, it is necessary then to have him lie about the problem which he has. Lying is the lowest order of creativeness. After he has lied about the problem for a short time, it will be found that he will be able to invent problems. He should be made to invent problems after problem until he is no longer concerned with the present time problem. The auditor should understand that the preclear who is now willing to do something about the problem has not been run long enough on the invention of problems in comparable magnitude. As long as the preclear is attempting to do something about the problem is still of excessive importance to him. No session can be continued successfully until such a present time problem is entirely flat and has been the experience with when a when a present time problem is not completely eradicated by this process, that the remainder of the session or indeed entire course of auditing may be interrupted. When a preclear does not seem to be advancing under auditing, a thing which he does marked and observably, it must be then be stopped. It must then be supposed that the preclear has a present time problem which has not been eradicated and which must be handled in auditing. Although the auditor gives the preclear to understand that he too believes that this present time problem is extremely important, the auditor should not believe that this process will not handle any present time problem, since it will. This process should be done on some preclears in company with the trio. If the preclear is asked to lie about or invent a problem of comparable magnitude, and while doing so becomes agitated or unconscious, or begins to talk wildly or absurdly, it must be assumed that he will have to have some happiness run on him until the agitation or manifestation ceases to be the problem of comparable magnitude process can be resumed. Another aspect of the ability to play a game is a willingness to win and a willingness to lose. An individual has to be willing to cause or willing to be an effect as far as games are concerned. This is reduced to a willingness to win and a willingness to lose. People become afraid of defeat and afraid of failure. The entire anatomy of failure is only that one's postulates or intuitions are reversed in action. For instance, one intends to strike a wall and strikes it. That is a win. One intends not to strike a wall and doesn't strike it. That again is a win. One intends not to strike a wall and strikes it. That is a lose. One intends to strike a wall and can't strike it. This is again a loss. It will be seen in this as well as other things that the most significant therapy there is change the mind. All things are as one considers they are, and no other way. If it is significantly simple to give the definition of winning and losing, so it is simple to process the matter. This condition is best expressed, it appears, in processing by a process known as overwhelming. An elementary way of running this is to take the preclear outside where there are numbers of people to observe, indicate a person, to ask the preclear, what could overwhelm that person? When the preclear answers this, he asks the same person, what could that person overwhelm? He then asks the third question, look around here and tell me what you could have. These three questions are run one after the other. Then another person is chosen, and the three questions are asked again. This process can be varied in its wording, but the central idea must remain as above. The preclear can be asked, what would you permit to overwhelm that person, and what would you permit that person to overwhelm? And of course, look around here and tell me what you could have. This is only one of a number of possible processes on the subject of overwhelming. But it should be noted that asking the preclear to think of things which would overwhelm him could be fatal to the case. Where overwhelming is handled, the preclear should be given a detached view, a counterposition to having processes, but one which is less therapeutic is separativeness. One asks the preclear to look around and discover things which are separate from things. This is repeated over and over. It is, however, destructive of happiness, even though it will occasionally prove beneficial. Is it really worth asking then? If it's even prove it to occasionally prove beneficial. Not always. So why do it in the first place? It will be seen that happiness barriers, not knowingness, being in present time and not in the past or the future, purposes, problems, and agonists are intention, counter intention, and separateness, freedom. Will cover the anatomy of games. It is not to be thought, however, that happiness addresses itself only to games. Many other factors into it, and among all of these, it is of the greatest single importance. One addresses in these days of Scientology the subjective self, the mind, as little as possible. One keeps the pre-clear alert to the broad environment around him, and addresses to the various energy patterns of the mind is less beneficial than exercises which directly approaches other people or the physical universe. Therefore, asking a pre-clear to sit still and answer the question, what could you have, when it is answered by the pre-clear from experience or on the score of things which are not present, is found to be non-therapeutic, and is found instead to decrease the ability and intelligence of a pre-clear. This is what is known as a subjective process. These are the principal processes which produce marked gains. There are other processes and there are combinations of processes, but these given here are the most important. A Scientologist, knowing the mind completely, can, of course, do many tricks with the conditions of people to improve them. One of these is the ability to address a psychosomatic illness, such as a crippled leg, which, having nothing physically wrong with it, yet is not usual. The auditor could ask the pre-clear, "Tell me a lie about your leg," with a possible relief of the pain or symptoms. Asking the pre-clear repeatedly, "Look around here and tell me something your leg could have," would undoubtedly release the synaptic. Asking the pre-clear with the bad leg, "What problem could your leg be to you?" or desiring him to invent a problem of comparable magnitude to your leg, would produce a distinct change in the condition of the leg. This would apply to any other body part or organ. It would also apply, strangely enough, to the pre-clear's possessions. If a pre-clear had a vehicle or cart which was out of repair or troublesome to him, one could ask him, "What problems could a cart be to you?" and thus requesting him to invent many such problems. One would discover that he had solved his problems with the cart. There is the phenomenon in insisting that the pre-clear already has many set games, which one asks him to give the auditor problems he already has the manifestation of as ising, or erasing taking place. Thought erases, therefore, the number of problems or games the pre-clear could have would be reduced by asking him to recount those which he already has. Asking the pre-clear to describe his systems is far less than therapeutic, and may result in a worsening of those symptoms, contrary to what some schools of thought have believed in the past, but which accounts for their failures. There are specific things which one must avoid in auditing. These follow. 1. Significances. The easiest thing a thetan does is change his mind. The most difficult thing he does is handle the environment in which he finds himself situated. Therefore, asking a thetan to run out various ideas is a fallacy. It is a mistake. Asking a pre-clear to think over something can also be an error. Asking a pre-clear to do exercises which concern his mind alone can be entirely fatal. A pre-clear is processed between himself and his environment. If he is processed between himself and his mind, he is possessed up too short a view, and his condition will worsen. Two-way communication. There can be far too much two-way communication and far too much communication in an auditing session. Communication involves the reduction of haviness, letting a pre-clear talk on and on or obsessively is to let a pre-clear reduce his haviness. The pre-clear who is permitted to go on talking will talk himself down the Jones scale into a bad condition. It is better for the auditor simply and discreetly to tell a pre-clear to shut up than to have the pre-clear run himself out of the bottom on haviness. You can observe this for yourself. If you permit a person who is not too able to talk about his troubles and keep on talking, he will begin to talk more and more hedatically. He is reducing his haviness. He will eventually talk himself down the tone scale into apathy, at which time he will be willing to tell you, as you insist upon it, that he feels better when, as a matter of fact, he is actually worse. As a pre-clear, how do you feel now, can reduce his haviness since he looks over his present time conditions and asks some mass. That's why they keep asking the same questions and don't say, go on. 3. Too many processes. It is possible to run a pre-clear on too many processes in too short time. A time with a reduction of pre-clear's recovery. This is handled by observing the communication lag of the pre-clear. It will be discovered that the pre-clear will space his answers to a repeated question differently with each answer. When a long period ensures between the question and his answer to the question a second time, he is said to have a communication lag. The communication lag is the length of time between the placing of the question by the auditor and the answering of that exact question by the pre-clear. It is not the length of time between the placing of the question by the auditor and some statement by pre-clear. It will be found that the communication lag lengthens and shortens on repeated question. The question on the 10th time has been asked may detect no significant lag. This is the time to stop asking that question since it is now no acceptable communication lag. One can leave any process with the communication lag for 3 successive questions is the same. In order to get from one process to another, one employee is communication bridge, which is marked degree reduces the liability of too many processes. A communication bridge is always used. Before a question is asked, the pre-clear should have the question discussed with him and the wording of the question agreed upon, as though he was making a contract with the auditor. The auditor says that he is going to have the pre-clear do certain things, and finds out that if it's all right with the pre-clear if the auditor asks him to do these things. This is the first part of the communication bridge. It precedes all questions, but when one is changing from one process to another, the bridge becomes a bridge indeed. One levels out the old process by asking the pre-clear whether or not he doesn't think it is safe to leave that process now. One discusses the possible benefit receiving from the process and then tells the pre-clear that he is no longer going to use that process. Now, he tells the pre-clear he is going to use a new process, describes the process, and gets an agreement on it. When the agreement is achieved, then he uses this process. The communication bridge is used at all times. The last half of it, the agreement on new process is used always before a new process begun. For some reason, as I was reading that, I was thinking of how some SJWs, when they have kids, babies, not able to speak, not yet able to crawl. These, it's okay if I change your diaper now. And it goes on to change the diaper type of thing. Yeah, sounds kind of SJW thing going on here. Anyways, let me know in the comments below if you think that too, or not, what your thoughts are in general. Okay, anyways, 4, failure to handle the present time problem. Probably more cases are stalled or found unable to benefit in processing because of the neglect of the present time problem, as covered above, than any other single item. Number 5, unconsciousness, quote unquote, dopiness, or agitation on the part of the preclear is not a mark of good condition. It is the loss of haviness. The preclear must never be processed into unconsciousness or dopiness. He should always be kept alert. The basic phenomenon of unconsciousness is a flow which has flowered too long in one direction. If one talks too long at somebody, he will render him unconscious. In order to wake up the target of all that talk, it is necessary to get the unconscious person to do some talking. It is simply necessary to reverse any flow to make unconsciousness disappear. But this is normal, cared for in modern Scientology by running the trio above. For some reason, I was thinking not only would someone fall asleep, which could be the unconsciousness that this book is talking about, but also zoning out. Like, you're there, you respond maybe, yeah, whatever, but you're really not hearing what they're saying. You have no relevancy of what they're saying. Like, I don't care what you're saying, I'm just here. That's it. The future of Scientology. With man now equipped with weapons sufficient to destroy all mankind on Earth, the emergence of a new science capable of handling man is vital. Scientology is such a science. It was born in the same crucible as the atomic bomb. The basic intelligence of Scientology came from nuclear physics, higher mathematics, and an understanding of the ancients of the East. Scientology can and does do exactly what it says it can do. In Washington, D.C., there is an enormous file cabinet filled with thousands of case histories, fully validated and sworn to, which attest the significant thoroughness of Scientology. With Scientology, man can prevent insanity, criminality, and war. It is for man to use. It is for the betterment of man. The primary race of Earth is not between one nation and another today. The only race that matters is that this moment, and a moment is the one being run between Scientology and atomic bomb. The history of man has been said by well-known authorities may well depend upon which one wins. Venice.